Good late afternoon, everybody. I'm Cheryl Durst, the Executive Vice President and CEO of IIDA. Welcome to Community as Strategy, the Dallas edition. We're so honored to do this program and support it and have this very important conversation and supported by KI. So let's do a little bit of housekeeping. And then we will, and basically housekeeping is talking about the fact that this program is CEU accredited. It's registered for 1 hour of continuing education. In order to receive the CEU, we need you to stay for the entire program. We'll know if you sneak out. We'll issue the certificates of completion electronically through IDCEC once the attendance has been reported for you. If you don't have a unique IDCEC number, it will be provided with the certificate of completion after this CEU. And let's jump right in and kick off our evening by asking our host, Deb Brunig of KI, to join me on screen. Hi, Deb, how are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you, Cheryl? Great to see you.
It's good to see you too. How about if you kick us off and talk a little bit about why this program is important for you and important for KI.
Yeah, certainly. And good evening, everyone. Welcome, Dallas. We love you. It's great to see you. Going to be joining everyone shortly. So a big hello from KI in Green Bay. Yeah, Cheryl, to your point, it's hard to believe how the world has changed over the last several months. This journey that we started with IIDA started in 2019. We got together with Cheryl and the team and wanted to look at what would be a partnership that we could work on together to bring some information, some great sharing to the industry. They curated, got together and looked and came back with the topic of community. It was very relevant. It fit a lot of the initiatives that we were working on at the time. And we had a great 2019. We brought the conversation to 6 different cities. We had a multidisciplinary group of panelists throughout those cities, listened, had a great time gathering, learned a lot. IIDA produced an amazing executive summary that if you, our guests, have not read that, make sure you do. We'll make sure we send that as a follow-up to you. But it was really enlightening around that topic. So enlightening that we wanted to continue the conversation. People were asking for more. So we, in 2020, made the decision that we wanted to expand that conversation and expand the cities that we were taking this conversation to, and that's what brings us to Dallas this evening. That was a vital part of it. We wanted to include the Dallas audience with that. So 2020, we know, has been I don't even know what, we have many names around it, but
choose the adjective, choose whatever it is, right? It hasn't been easy to create and affect community, but knowing that this conversation, Deb, right, is so important. BC, before COVID, when we would hold these programs in various cities, we'd have this very intimate gathering of 25 or 30 designers with cocktails to have this conversation. And, you know, we don't want to lose that aspect of being connected as a community. And so our best way to create community now is to have this virtual community on screen. And so we're going to invite everyone on screen. And before I even introduce you to the panelists, let's get our attendees on screen. All right, it'll take a few moments. You all should be receiving, we're converting you from attendees to panelists. Ooh, Becky Burris, I see you're in the audience. Russ Manthe, come on screen, everybody. There's Russ. Julie. Tanisha Miller, hey there. Oh, Lindsay. Hey, Lindsay. All right. It's the end of the day. I know a few folks may not be feeling camera ready, but we love seeing your faces. There's Dale. Wonderful. I know a lot of Team IIDA is staying behind camera. Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. It's good. You know, this is, we get to make eye contact with you when you're on screen. Hey, Rosa. It's so good to see all of you. And we'll do this again. We'll get you all back on screen at the end of the program for our Q&A session. But it's just nice to see who's here. It's nice to see everybody. It's great to see your dining rooms, your family rooms, your Zoom rooms, your Zoom corners, your Zorners. And we're glad that you're here and hope everybody's happy and healthy. All right. So we are going to, we're going to get comfortable, get ready to jump in. You're going to be hearing from our panelists shortly. So the magic team of IIDA is going to flip you all back to attendees. Don't get dizzy. Don't get motion sickness. And I'm really excited to be having a conversation today with three really amazing women. As you all know, you're so fortunate to have them part of your community. We've got Frances Bruns with IA, Rachel Rouse with HOK, and Adelia Schlois with HKS Architects. So welcome to each of you. And I think with that, we are ready to jump right in and get started. Panelists, are you feeling ready?
I'm ready.
Good.
Sure.
Excellent, excellent. Deb, thank you. Looking forward to a great discussion here in Dallas, and we'll see you when we bring you back on toward the end.
Thanks.
All right, so it seems an appropriate place to start any conversation about community and about strategy. And if you guys can, if back of the house can advance the slide for me. Let's get, brand and culture are such an integral part of any conversation about community and strategy. Those two establishing factors are critical to you as designers. They're critical to your clients, even though your clients may not necessarily use those words when talking about community. They always, I feel like clients are always asking designers, tell us who we are. Tell us who we are as a brand. Help us analyze, diagnose our culture. And Frances, I'd love to start with you with this conversation with the role that brand and culture play in the design of an interior environment. And I'll just toss in, you know, are we thinking differently about brand and culture in kind of this pandemic moment when people are not necessarily attached to the physical space or are attached in a very different way?
Yeah, definitely. I think brand and culture is one of the first things that we always talk to a client about when we start conversations. Even before they've hired us, quite often we're talking about that in the interview, trying to get to know them, understand who they are and who they want to be, because culture often evolves as we're going through the design process. So I do think it continues to be really important. Culture is one of those things during this pandemic that we're all worried about. Because it's difficult to build culture when you're not in the same space with each other. So definitely that is something that people continue to focus on as well. And I think that we can take culture, you know, one of two different extreme ways. You know, sometimes we do it in a very subtle way, and you're infusing it in places where people may not realize it, but you're doing it quietly. We can also do it in a very literal way. And I have an example of a project where we've done it a little bit more literally with them. And if you'll advance the slide, we can look at this a little bit. So this is the DraftKings headquarters. And I don't know if any of you are online gamblers, but that is what DraftKings does. They are so fun to work with. Part of their motto is about being inside the game. So everything in this space speaks to that and is very, very heavily branded because of that. So when you enter the space and you come off the elevator, you're actually in the tunnel to the stadium. You come out of the tunnel into a stadium, into a big, large space. I'm so glad we have video so I can wander my hands around as we talk. You go into the reception area, you look up the mirror, there's mirror on the ceiling, which makes you feel like you're actually in the game. So being a part of the game and being inclusive is so important to them. And to their culture as well. They tend to be very exuberant, energetic, demonstrative people, really fun clients to work with. They know absolutely who they are. And so that kind of infuses in the space all throughout. And if we can flip to the next one, this is a very large cafe space for them. So talking about being more literal instead of subtle, obviously this looks like a stadium. They have been so inclusive in this space that the LED lights can change to 400 and something different colors. So every single team you can imagine, you know, hockey, baseball, football, NASCAR, golf, anything that you can think of, they can change the colors within this space to be super inclusive of all those different sports and all those different people to celebrate those wins with them. It also really feels like a sports bar, which is a place that you often go to do betting. So that's perfect for them. And then if you flip to the next one, this was 100,000 square foot floor plate. If you can only imagine how lost you would get in a floor plate like this. So we define neighborhoods by using different sports. And you can see this one is obviously basketball. There is not a single basketball in the space, but it's very reminiscent of that. And so the neighborhoods are defined by different sports, and every single huddle area has a very different experience in it as well. So this is an example of taking their culture and their brand and infusing it in kind of a literal way within the space.
Yeah. Rachel, what about brand and culture? Can you talk to us a bit about how you talk about brand and culture with your clients?
So the way I like to talk about brand and culture with my clients in an early discussion is about experience. So brand and culture are what makes the experience of working for that company happen. And so when we're doing a space for a client, what we're hoping to mirror is we're hoping that the space mirrors the experience that the employees are getting, and that in the case of Shiseido here, that the customers get when they buy the product, when they use the product. Shiseido is a Japanese cosmetics manufacturer, and this is their US headquarters. And
that's such a great example, because in a retail example, the customers are walking away with a piece of brand and culture.
Exactly. And you feel differently when you use their product. And so it's part of and it's a very green brand, for lack of a better way to put that. They're very environmentally friendly. And so a lot of those concepts have gone into this space, and it's their US headquarters, but it still feels very Japanese. So we used influence from their old, I love this, the space is full of their ads. The company is over 100 years old, and so there is some incredible historical ad work that has been done, and they're just beautiful, and they're in these fabulous and incredible colors, and they're from the 20s, and they just have a feel and a vibe to them that really infused the space with the experience of using the product and buying the product. And if you want to move on to the next one, it's throughout the space, and it's of course beautiful. It's in New York City. How bad could it be, right? But they take up multiple floors in this space, and so they've got some opportunities for extra light in the space and greenery, and they added, you know, living walls and things that, and everything in their cafe is very healthy and again mimics the experience of their brand.
I love that moment of in the previous photo where it's almost a brand archive. So you get their past as well as you go from a brand archive with ads from the 20s to a living wall, which is very much au courant, very much now.
Exactly. And the blush pinks and the colors we were able to use in this are just so unusual and very particular to a cosmetics manufacturer.
Rachel, would you say that they were pretty brand solid, that they knew who they were, and so there wasn't a lot of help us as a client understand who we are?
That's very true. In this particular case, they came with a very significant background, and so that's why we weren't teaching them how to use their brand. They understood that innately. Now it was a matter of how do we express that brand for their, so that their day-to-day employees in the office can feel the same way that the gal at the makeup counter feels, can feel the same way as their clients feel.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Adalia, let's talk a little bit about culture with your clients.
So, so branding and culture, it's somewhat of an art, especially when it comes to some of our education clients. No different than the other panelists have described, combining the interior environment and the actual experiences. But we do take, deep analysis, and there's a lot of scientific rigor that we place on empathy from the macro to the micro. So it's really understanding, the regional qualities, the local ecosystems, the local culture. For our clients, it's oftentimes the socioeconomic factors and understanding clearly the clients and the end user's vision. So oftentimes we may have a clear understanding of their mission statement and their promise to their communities, and relative information that informs our approach. However, it's more complex in true service to our clients in these instances. So we engage in deep dives with our stakeholders. That includes students, that includes diverse learners, parents, teachers, community members, board members, our community groups. And this example does pull at your heartstrings a little bit, but it's one of our Dallas school clients, and they engaged us to look at classroom additions and provide a connector of two buildings that were essentially separated. And there was a lot of space in between. They were separated by a fire lane, and we quickly gathered insights from the community members after a series of conversations and revealed other obstacles in their community that wouldn't be solved by just linking the two buildings together with a block of classrooms and a corridor. It really became an issue of the campus had duplicate rooms and cafeterias and libraries and science labs. So all the program spaces were sort of dispersed, and it led to unintentional student segregation and left teachers from the same department stranded in opposite corners. And teens had no space for outdoors, to socialize, to traverse, in their social groups. So it really complicated the situation. So we helped the school community group identify the priorities of the school, and really think about, how to unify the campus. How do we create this design dining hub, flexible space, and it's a significant architectural intervention in between those two buildings that were 9 feet, vertical differences. So the design solution became, it was a hub that was designed to create that sense of belonging, that sense of place in that community, and provide, choice to the students, whether it's dining spaces at different locations, a common area that they could grab and, sit on the pre-function learning stair, spaces, or little niches for, seating and gathering together. So, and we also, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. And obviously we're thinking about the places where learning happens very differently now, living through, a pandemic. And so it will be interesting knowing that students get very attached to those spaces where they learn. how that's going to shift in your world,
Right.
particularly in K through 12 and in higher ed.
Right, and making those, those connections and really defining what that community sense of belonging feels like. That is, sort of the unsaid branding and culture of those spaces. And, thinking about, those larger spaces that can become flexible and adaptable in the future as we think through technology and things like that, placemaking.
Yeah, perfect. As we think about how community is communicated, right? And we know that one of the goals of community, as a design strategy, community simply supports a network. And whether that's an acknowledged network of workplace or people in a library or people in a theater, or it's an unintentional network, everything is around purpose. Everything is centered around purpose. And I'd be interested to know if a client, an existing or new client, has ever specifically asked you to support, has explicitly asked you to support their community goals. Frances, has a client come to you and said, here are our goals?
Guess what? Yes, they have. And it's funny, I think as the years go by, more and more clients are realizing the importance of community, and not just creating community within their own office space and with their employees, but also reaching out to the community beyond and supporting them and giving offerings to those people outside of their space. And nowhere does that happen more when we're doing projects that are in downtown areas and in very urban areas, where you are already intrinsically connected to community, because often you're on a first floor, like this retail space that we're looking at. So this is a retail client that absolutely was embracing community. This is a banking center. Banking centers are normally 2,500, 3,000 square feet. This is 10,000 square feet. Wow. So they more than tripled the amount of space that they leased because they wanted to provide amenities to the community and be a real partner for this neighborhood and for the community. So within this space, we've actually brought planters and greenery that you see out on the street into the space. So to kind of connect the street to the space, we've got a full service coffee shop. You do not have to be a client of this particular financial institution to come in. In fact, they don't want you to be. This is a way that they're also marketing. So if I'm looking for a space to go touch down and work for a little while, or if I'm in between client meetings, or if I don't have an office and I don't want to go rent space in a co-working site, this is somewhere you can come because they want you to, and they're encouraging you to. The space is incredibly flexible, so they're allowing for people to do community meetings and bringing people in throughout the day and maybe even after the workday as well. So this is one of those spaces that didn't just embrace community internally, but externally. And we're seeing that in so many places. A lot of our large scale headquarters that we work on, they are working with us, our clients are working with us to design space that can be used after hours and on the weekends for the community to come in and use those spaces at a discount or for free. So definitely that kind of giving back is something that continues to get more and more important with our clients as well. And this is an example quite literally of connecting the space to the street and making sure that everything feels fully connected to the community.
So this is really causing us to think about the function and purpose of what a lobby area.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this isn't even really a lobby. It's more a welcome center or hospitality.
It's a welcome center, yeah.
Absolutely. And, I can go in here and have a corner office at any point of the day because they are gifting that to everyone.
Fantastic. Adelia, how within the context of your world and your clients or education is community communicated?
So, and I mentioned earlier a little bit about, the stakeholder sessions and the community engagement that we do. Oftentimes, our clients have, deep thought into their mission and their overarching goals that we always, take with them along, through the design process. And naturally, the notion for designing for purpose comes quite natural to the needs of our education clients because the purpose is all about the students. It's all about the future and their overall mission designing for lifelong learning. So we talk about education, lifelong, working in the workplace and moving forward with a sense of purpose. So this example is, the Fine Arts and Athletics Center. This is the Fine Arts that we're included district-wide discussions concerning every aspect of their mission and really thinking about the educational experience well into the design process, which this facility is underway currently. And it will eventually become the centerpiece of the district's art programs in direct response to their community goals, which we've established early on with them. So again, a lot of it is understanding where they are currently, where they are, or they vision themselves in the future, and then really listening on added value to the spaces, or rethinking what a pre-function space is, or thinking about what a piano storage, for example. In this view, the program asked for piano storage. So on the right, there was a concert hall where they would roll the piano out delicately into a storage. What we did was we opened the back of the storage into the learning center. So that way it could be learning on display. They could open it up and have a secondary performance space and really create that flexible learning environment. So really thinking about what is an amenity, how can we enhance a sense of community and a sense of place and create that flexibility that they so need.
Fantastic. That's what a great space.
And this is just some more unique gallery spaces, really thinking about that really close connection to the theater and that experience. And one thing was we were under a tight budget, and we worked tirelessly to reallocate, where we would maximize the value to our client, and really thinking about, as it looks like more than we spent, obviously, so we really try to think of a state-of-the-art experience through really thoughtful cost estimation. And that was really important to our client, is really spending money where it is most critical to the students and really makes that impact through their vision and through the lens of the student.
When you answered the previous question and we were talking about brand and culture, and I wanted to tie back to that, you used a great phrase about, you said micro, macro. You really used the duality. You used micro, macro, and you said art and science, which is so critical, I think, to the work that all designers do, right? It's,
Absolutely.
You're absorbing the artfulness of the space, but the science of how people perform in those spaces, and intrinsically understanding what human beings require, but leaving room for serendipity, because sometimes human behavior can't be predicted or calculated, nor can community be predicted or calculated. Have you ever had, in the context of a space, something occur that you or the client didn't expect?
So I love the idea of sort of that organic finding, right? So we'll talk about that beauty and performance. And that, I would say, happens on most of our projects, because the way that we engage our client is, very outcome driven and science based, but at the same time, always listening for new opportunities. Yeah. And so, as you said, they may come up with, a certain idea or a certain direction that they want to go. And then we sort of, serendipity, like find something new or find an added value that we uncovered in those sessions. So I always say we listen for the unsaid or the unspoken.
I love
so
that.
There's a lot of observation that's going on, and just the way that we kind of engage and talk to one another. And so I would say on most projects there's one of those moments where we kind of sit back and we say, this could be really great. Let's do this. How can we do this? And we do it together.
Yeah. And the aha can be really beautiful. Those aha moments can be really beautiful.
Yep.
So part of that shift that we talk about, the art and the science and design not being dictatorial, let's talk a little bit about space and place. And we know that space is physical, but place, sense of place, placemaking is emotional. And right, we need that transformation of space to place. That all goes toward communicating community as well. Rachel, can you jump in and talk a little bit about this transformation from space to place, the physical to the emotional?
Yeah, absolutely. So the example that I've brought along is a company called Pharmavite. They make vitamins, and this is their headquarters space. And part of what made this such a successful project for us was because in the visioning session, their CEO and their team truly came together and came up with this incredibly clear vision of what they wanted. And instead of that vision getting diluted as the project process went on, they continued to hold on to that, and it managed to be the central point of the entire process. They decided they wanted to have everything centered around the national parks. So it's included in their wayfinding. It's included in the way the space feels. That's why they've brought in the green wall. And those are real plants. They actually built a watering system in the wall so that they could be, sort of planted and dealt with without too much maintenance. It's really incredible. Just to be able to see a client really, truly pick a vision for what they want and really learn to live with it. Yeah, their CEO, for instance, sits in the same desk everybody else does. He insisted that that's the right way to go. And if I'm going to ask all of my staff to, sit in a cubicle, and do this open concept space, then I'm going to do it too. And that's what I really love about it is I think it makes it easier for the team and the people it made it easier for our team to bring that vision to life when it was that solid and that well thought out and everybody was on board.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it creates a certain sense of ownership for all of the employees too. I think when you have that kind of solid leadership from the CEO and that solid vision that truly gets, incorporated throughout the whole project, it really does create that sense of community and ownership for each individual employee, and it's incredible to see.
So it looks like this is a client who was very brand strong and brand secure,
Very
and
much
there was
so.
a very solid purpose for them to
Absolutely.
operate around. Yeah.
And it was a
And
huge
clear and
change.
communicated. It's right, communicated
Absolutely.
clearly to the employees.
Very much so. And it was a complete change from what they were in. They were used to a very, very old-fashioned office environment with Steelcase 9000 60-inch panels and private offices around the perimeter where nobody got to share any of the light. So it was a really transformative project for them too.
Yeah. Another great word, transformative. Francis, let's talk a little bit about space to place and a client or clients that you've worked with who have well-articulated core values and have made that transformation.
Absolutely. And Rachel is so right. When you have that vision and those core values coming from the very top and kind of going throughout the company and everyone is rallying around that and understands that and lives and breathes it, it makes it so easy because every decision you make, every design option you put in front of somebody, you're connecting back to that. And this happens to be Match.com. Which I'm pretty sure everyone is aware of. So Match.com is a dating site. They are all about love and connection. And from the very first meeting, they were talking about love, which is so funny because I've been taught in business that you don't use that word. They use it constantly. And so this entire space is about celebrating love and connection not only among their team, but those connections that they're creating for their members as well. So every single spot that you go to in this space is all about connection. This happens to be what I would call a town hall space, they call a grand lounge. They're constantly doing celebrations in here. We actually had to put this floor between the other two floors because they bring DJs in all the time for people to come together and hang out. And it's so loud that you have to buffer it with the floors on either side of it so it doesn't start rattling the other people in the building. But this space is used constantly. A lot of people work in here instead of working at their desk, so they can kind of see each other and see everybody come and go. So this grand lounge space is a real connector for them, and it really does celebrate those connections and love, and not only love among their members, but their team members as well. And if you flip to the next slide, this is part of the work area. So embedding these spaces where people can get together, so often we worry about that. We don't want to just plop them everywhere because people aren't going to get together just in chairs plopped everywhere. But this is really a cultural thing for them. And y'all may be giggling. We were talking earlier, we all model in our own shots, so you can start trying to pick all of us out in our shots. But
there you are.
There I am. So we have little connector zones like this, often with food next to it, because food is an important part of culture and an important
food is love, Frances.
Showing your employees that you love them and you take care of them. In fact, Match.com has more different flavors of flavored water than you will find in a 7-Eleven. And it is so every person within the company has something that they want. And it's a way that they show love by giving them back those amenities. So obviously, tremendous visual connection here. If you go to the next slide, it shows the workspace. Within the workspaces, we used a Herman Miller system that actually had team tables built into the workspaces because they wanted people to be able to connect that way throughout the workspace and all these zones throughout. These tables, you were talking earlier about something we didn't expect. These tables help people meet within the work areas so organically that they actually didn't use all of the conference rooms that we built for them. They were so short on conference space. We gave them a lot. They didn't need it because they were just meeting, day to day within the workspace. So that kind of connection was so important to them and something that came from the CEO all the way down. And then obviously in the next slide, environmental graphics are an important part of this project because you want to celebrate those connections and those wins. As soon as you get off the elevator, you were looking at pictures of wedding invitations and baby announcements, and so celebrating love and celebrating that love that they've helped create, showing all the metrics so people understand every day the kinds of connections that they're making. And then this is so fun on the right, all of the whiteboard spaces actually have love songs on them, and we were sending love song lyrics back and forth to the CEO trying to pick the right songs. And I can only imagine if their IT group saw the lyrics that we're sending back and forth, how crazy they thought it was. But this is a really good example of the CEO having a super clear vision, everyone in the company already believing in that and just manifesting it in the space. And it was so fun to do.
Well, obviously their belief system, their physical environment supports what they really believe they do as a company. And I think for so many designers, it's sometimes easy to say a tech company is a tech company is a tech company. Clearly, this is not your average tech company.
Tech company that celebrates love. Where else do you find that? Yeah.
Amen to that. I really randomly, I have an old college roommate of mine is part of the legal counsel for Match. And she talks about her clients in terms of, she said, my client makes love. And, she said, how many attorneys can say that? Now, it's interesting some of the things that legal counsel at Match.com get involved in, but
absolutely.
But even their legal counsel, I just think it's so interesting that every strata, every layer, every person in that company supports their end product. Their byproduct is love, and that is spoken so explicitly as a company.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's move on to talking about wellness and well-being and active design, almost all kind of things under this umbrella of social responsibility, which is such an of the moment conversation right now. All of those, the conversation about diversity and social justice and what we do to uplift the dignity of humanity, that's all related to designing for community. How have you seen these elements supporting and influencing and combining in new ways for your clients. Adelia, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, as you said, so, we highly believe that our role as designers and obligation as designers is to improve lives, right? And especially for the vulnerable populations. So, we talk about social sustainability and resiliency on par with our environmental needs, environmental and social governance. So this, for example, it was a pro bono design and research project for Sensory Wellbeing Hub. So we've been talking about, well-being and what that means in all facets of our life, right? In all spaces that we inhabit, whether it's indoor, outdoor, as we traverse to work or go to school. So this was Sensory Wellbeing Hub that we created. It was a public and private partnership between Chicago Public Schools, Lane Tech College, School Alumni Association, ASID Foundation, dozens of consultants and in-kind material donors, and also with our Citizen HKS, which is our firm's social impact initiative that we have throughout the firm. So, we work really close with our, research partners, designers, and really try to take these really big notions and outline them with more ambitious goals and empathic goals to improve the lives of people with sensory processing challenges, and really think about, the individual. So this is one of many ongoing initiatives to put a spotlight back on, well-being and improve social emotional health. So this, for example, was at a school, but we have since then learned from our research, and what we've learned really is respite spaces, they don't have to be prescribed or predetermined or expensive or proprietary. So it's really trying to utilize that research, that ongoing research, and then share that with our clients and have those conversations on how we can, use this information and really improve all the spaces that we design for and all the clients that we serve with a very broad sort of macro, approach to being inclusive and accommodating diverse populations.
Yeah, and again, well phrased. In addition to strategy and goals and culture, having empathic goals are key and critical for clients, particularly now.
Right. Yeah.
I'm sorry, were you going to jump in with something else?
No, I was just going to say, and for me personally, always it's the question always falls back on, how do we tie design to outcome? As you're saying, through the definition of intent, through informed design strategies that tie directly the intent through delivering those design strategies. And it allows us to have really meaningful and measurable impact. So we all continue to learn and we're doing it together, right?
Yeah, which is critical. Frances, how has the conversation around social responsibility impacted your clients?
So, it happens in a lot of different ways. And the example that I brought along, which is very different than Adelia's, but still, I think, everyone approaches social distancing. Did you hear me just say that? I'm so used to that.
I heard you say that.
I'm so tired of that. So this happens to be HEV Favors headquarters in Austin. So what they did is they actually took Austin's first recycling center and recycled it. So from a social responsibility, from a reuse and adaptability standpoint, it is a fantastic space, but giving it a second life, a third life, a fourth life. Obviously there's a tremendous amount of community space in here as well, but the thing that they did is they gave back to the community by taking a significant part of the budget and giving that over to local artists. Not just art like you would see on walls and murals or textile arts, but a lot of the furniture was built by local artists. The picnic tables out on the patio were built by an artist actually in Marfa, so trying to give money back there as well. So keeping all of those kind of branding items and those special things within the community and celebrating that space with those artists as well. And then we'll flip to the next one really quick. So here's an example of the picnic tables that were, you think of the picnic table from somebody in Marfa and you think that it looks like a big wooden table. It's actually a beautiful metal table that's sitting out there. In terms of wellness, this is a very large space, but They have lots of tracks that you can walk around to get all of your steps in. So you can keep wellness on the mind from there as well, and beautiful volumes because it was a recycling center. And then if you go to the next one, obviously these kinds of wellness spaces are incredibly important. We've got climbing walls, we've got bike shops where you can park your bike in here and help take care of that. So really helping people kind of be a part of this community and giving that kind of wellness back to them as well. I love the recycling story of the recycling center.
Yeah, yeah. I'm looking at this guy though. I think, you know, so many of us, and we're still working from home, I think we are literally climbing walls, just not with the benefit of a base camp.
Yeah, you know, the big question is with all these wellness centers and the impact of COVID is when will we actually be able to come back in and use these? Because so much of what's great about wellness is being able to do these activities with others. So hopefully we'll be able to use those very soon. But the story of recycling the recycling center and all of this local art and being responsible to people within the community and giving that money back to them is so important.
Yeah. Francis, do you think that, you know, again, with a vast cohort of folks working from home, working virtually, working remotely, how is wellness being talked about or translated for those of us who are working remotely, and knowing that emotional health is so incredibly important? Are you seeing any of your clients take any of their concepts around wellness, and I'll open this to everyone else as well. Are you seeing your clients translate wellness into a virtual environment?
Yeah, so we have seen a lot of that. A lot of it is also building community within that virtual environment. So doing yoga classes together, boxing classes together, you know, all those things that you can do online and kind of get together and see each other and try to take on something new. And I've even tried a yoga class virtually. It was not a positive experience. I'm apparently not very stretchy, but definitely doing those kinds of things there. And there seems to be a tremendous amount of outreach from companies because we're all worried about our employees and we're all worried that they're doing okay. So there's a lot of programs now that are available that weren't really available before, where you can call in and you know, talk to somebody if you need help. Or I think that it's really spurred a lot of wellness initiatives that we didn't have in place before, or maybe they weren't as visible. And now they're so visible, and you know that they're there and they're being promoted constantly, which I think is actually fantastic. You know, our team is talking about doing a 5K for one of our teammates, and as a fundraiser. But you know, you can actually go out and do a 5K and be socially distanced. You can kind of yell at each other through masks while you're doing it, but there are ways to do it. You just have to be careful about it. Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you for that. We hadn't necessarily previously discussed that, but it is fascinating the way that organizations are crafting ways to instill and create community. It's easier for some, I think, than others. It feels like companies who are secure and confident in their identities and their brand are more secure and confident in establishing those kinds of virtual goals around community and health and wellness as well.
Yeah.
So let's jump to Rachel. Let's jump to and talk a bit about the grassroots effect of community. And we know that neuroscientists have told us from a behavioral standpoint that human beings, we're pack animals, we're social beings. We're hardwired to be much more attentive in spaces that allow us to feel part of a community. And again, we talked about creating community around purpose and around goals. Let's talk a little bit about beyond purpose and goals. What else does design do to, and I'm going to purposely use the word craft, community? And how do you work with clients to create community?
Yeah. So to me, it was really interesting that you brought up the neuroscientists. We've been doing a lot of research into neurodiversity, and 15 to 20% of employees generally, assign themselves as being neurodivergent in some form or fashion. And this particular client, Hodges Ward Elliott, they are a hospitality real estate firm. So they assist with the funding when a new hotel is coming up. And a couple of their employees have sort of self-diagnosed themselves as being neurodivergent. And what was really interesting to me was that this client really wanted to take that into effect and wanted to be inclusive and wanted to make sure that while we're giving them the brand experience, we're trying to, not only make this office space feel a little bit like one of their hotels. The client even gave us a couple of his favorite hotels in Austin that he really liked, and he really wanted to kind of mirror that cozy atmosphere. So it doesn't look like, it's not your typical office space. There are the areas of respite, where you can really get away and you can actually just sit down with a book and be quiet for a little while. The interesting thing about this is it actually, for this client, came into their real estate decision too. The building that they are in is part of, you guys, Cheryl might not be familiar with it, but the local folks will recognize the Union in downtown Dallas, or rather in Uptown. And it has its own community effect. It's a multi-tiered type of development where you can theoretically live right there. There are, nice apartments, there are multiple restaurants, and the client remarked when we came in to take the photographs a few months after they had moved in about how much they had enjoyed feeling like they were part of that community as well. Their team, which used to basically all be online and barely talk to one another during the day. They would all be, in different parts of the space doing different things. And now they were literally getting up and going to lunch together. In one of these restaurants downstairs. And so there are other ways to create that community by being in the right place at the right time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So your geography can
Absolutely
guide your community destiny, which means your stakeholders, or your stakeholder isn't just your client. It could be a local neighborhood. It could be a developer. It could be a community activist, depending on the community. And I think that's a great important point, that community obviously expands beyond just that client that you're working with, but the fact that they were so deliberate in their site selection.
Right. And part of that is probably because part of what they do for their day job essentially is finding sites.
Right.
And so they're looking for when they go to look for a hotel site, they want something that has community, that has walkability, that has a reason for you to want to stay there. And it was so intriguing to have them really be thinking about all of those things when they were thinking about an office space, not just this is where I'm going to come from 9 to 5 and then I'm going to jet.
That's great. So let's move right in from grassroots to where does this all go? What is, particularly through the lens of a pandemic, let's talk about the future of community. And I want to have you kind of continue along those lines, Rachel, and let's chat a bit about what is the future of this business of creating community.
Okay. You guys had mentioned specifically in academia wanting to have some idea of what we're seeing, what we're teaching our students. And I work with a group in Dallas called CREW, Commercial Real Estate Women, and we produce annually a program called CREW Careers, where we work with DISD, that's our local independent school district, and we bring in somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 80 high school students and take them through a new development. And this last year, we actually toured them through this project, which is Trammell Crow Center, downtown Dallas. And this space included a bunch of the things that you want to help create community. It's got restaurants, it's got art. It has a fabulous outdoor space where people can sit and enjoy, and you don't necessarily have to be in the building or have a reason to go there. It could literally just be that you have walked over from a couple of blocks and gotten a coffee at the coffee shop on the first floor, and you can sit on the patio and enjoy. And it's the kind of development that truly does create more community in that space. This is in the middle of our arts district downtown, and it changes the way people feel about it. So with this program, we're not only educating the students on how a building and how a space and how architecture and design can help create community, but we're actually creating community among the students by bringing them all together. There's usually 8 to 10 different high schools who all participate in this program, and it's really lovely to see that you're getting both levels of that. You know, you're not only exposing kids that would not normally be brought downtown for a tour like this and have the opportunity to see a big commercial office building, but you're explaining the nature of community as well. So I feel like we have a bright future ahead of us. We have these opportunities and ways to be able to help our young people understand what it is and grow in that manner.
It's interesting to think, can you imagine being in design school now?
I know.
And this conversation about what community means, and thinking about these young future designers who are going to be crafting space for a post-COVID organization, post-COVID population. We're all going to think so differently about how we gather. And the fact that there are, students in school right now who are already considering what the built environment is going to be like post-COVID. We're all living through it. They're in school living through it in a very different way.
Absolutely.
Let's, in the vein of thinking about the future of community, let's be predictive. Let's talk a bit about what's next. Let's talk about what community-centric spaces might look like or feel like, or what kinds of goals clients might have about their community-centric spaces. This notion of how we'll gather is obviously, it's shifting because of COVID, but simply pre-COVID, we were in a very communal moment. Society was described as communal. What's community going to look like in 2050? I'd love for Adelia, let's start with you to be predictive.
Sure. And no, I love the point of, really listening to the students and understanding what their expectations are, because while we are educating them, they are educating us so much more, and the expectations have shifted on what that community and that sense of purpose really looks like when we talk about them being global citizens. So I think that our current youth and our subsequent generations will expect more seamless integration of sort of our conventional amenities, really true innovation opportunities. We talked a little bit about unique dining experiences and connected and central green spaces, education and workplace campuses that serve as a living lab of learning, where you can live, work, and play. So this example is a collegiate center for collaborative innovation, which serves as kind of a catalyst for education, research, a knowledge center, a welcoming destination program with a unique conference center, hotel, indoor and outdoor sustainable gardens, learning labs, as well as amphitheater, learning pavilion. So this is really a visionary kind of client that we are engaged with. And it's directly from the mouths of the students, from the younger generation, saying, what is your future like beyond 2050? What can we predict that these spaces will look like? So it's a lot of program going into it, but it's really blurring the lines of sort of these vertical markets we're seeing. So there's certainly a huge opportunity here to embrace, you know, science and technology. So science and technology is going to be, you know, whereas before the pandemic, we talked about the future of education, the future of the workplace. It sort of exacerbated the growth and the sort of globalization into that, you know, into those markets in a more rapid speed. So it's almost like we were maybe on the right path of thinking, but now we're just like, you know, what do we say? Like, you know, adding gas to the cars, we're going.
Yeah.
So really it's trying to think about, you know, adaptable spaces and flexible spaces and reconfigurable solutions for the future of the unknown, because, you know, none of us have a crystal ball, but we can certainly think about, you know, what that might look like for our communities that we serve now.
That's perfect. Rachel, you know, be predictive a bit.
Yeah, well, Adelia's totally right about the flexibility model. Like that is so important, and I feel like that's going to be super important in the workplace. It's going to become more important in the education space, and as we're seeing education and the corporate office kind of start to look more like one another and mirror one another a little bit, it's because those younger generations come in with that expectation of wanting it to be more like college than, you know, than sitting in a cube farm, and I can't blame them. But what I have been seeing is what we're thinking is going to happen is that you want to be together for certain things and you don't want to be together for certain things. Like when you're sitting down trying to do really heads down work, you really don't want to be in a space with 12 other people. You want to be in your confined space. Perhaps being at home is better for you. And what we've been talking about a lot is this hub and spoke model. And I feel like this can actually speak to the education market as well. And you're going to want to get together when you collaborate. And because of COVID, you know, you'll see an uptick in, for instance, the local community colleges versus some of the big universities, because why spend the money to go to Cornell when you can't actually go? You're going to have to be doing it virtually anyway. So I really feel like this hub and spoke model is going to pick up steam, where you may have the main campus and you may also have these satellite campuses that are, maybe they're not very big, maybe they're in a downtown district and they're, you know, flexible, and the idea is you can get downtown by train and you can collaborate with your colleagues, and perhaps instead of a massive lecture hall in the central campus, you will all be watching the same university professor with, you know, 10 people. And why on earth couldn't we do that in the corporate world as well? My company does that. You know, our CFO and our CEO will get on a WebEx, and 10 or 12 of us will sit in a conference room and listen to it together. But it's not bringing everybody together in the same place. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to have these 3 different places that you're going to be, and there's going to be some things that are best done from home, and there's going to be some things that are best done from that remote small space, that second, you know, home. And then there are other things that are going to be better done from the true office and or education hub.
Yeah. And that discovery obviously is happening now. All 3 of you have mentioned home in one context or another, and we know that residential design has had great influence on workplace and retail and hospitality and vice versa. Do you think that we'll all be thinking differently about, will we be redefining what home means, right? It's sanctuary, it's oasis, but it's a healing environment. It's a learning environment. It has become a workplace. Are we going to see influence, a continued influence of residential on to workplace and the other disciplines, and vice versa? Do you see that expanding and proliferating?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see how there's any way it couldn't, especially for the folks who've been sitting at their dining room table for the last 6 months. You can only do that for so long before you realize you need to have a dedicated space, or your entire life is going to get eaten up with work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and it becomes sort of it's now your unique destination, right? Because it's your learning space, it's your workplace, it's your family space. So it's really thinking about, the scalability of the notion of community. So, we can take that from the home to the workplace, to the education learning environment, which, we're seeing unbundled education and rebundling of education.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot more entrepreneurship that people are taking, ownership of their paths, and it's maybe many different paths, or maybe the paths are shifting. And, but I do find it really interesting on, navigating our lives through home. You have to have those boundaries, right? So you can have a moment to, rejuvenate or take a breath, or, healthy eating choices.
Yeah.
We talk about, underrepresented students and individuals that don't have access to healthy eating, communities and schools that don't have access to that virtual learning as easy as, some of us do. So really thinking about, things in the context that are driven by our unique destinations, our unique cultures, our unique backgrounds that sort of define those homes. So it can get really complicated really quick, but it's really an interesting notion to scale the sense of place.
Definitely.
Yeah.
At home, we have so many choices. And had we gone home for a month and then come back, I don't think it would have the influence that now we've been home, like 5 months, and who knows when that's going to end. And you can very easily go outside, sit in the kitchen, sit in the office, curl up on the couch, and providing those kinds of choices for people within, if their formal workspace, going back to the office, if they choose to go back to the office, I think is going to be incredibly important. And then Adelia, you talked about earlier, kind of the blending of live, work, play. And I mean, that is all happening in our homes right now. So it clearly is very easy to blend.
Sometimes one heavier than the other, right?
Yeah.
Say one a little bit heavier than the other one. Yeah. Definitely that. And then Rachel, you also talked a lot about technology and connection, and looking forward, I think that as we start to bring kids out of school, and the kids that aren't even born yet, looking at 2050, this kind of connection that we have right now is probably going to feel a lot more natural to them. It still feels very weird to me that I'm looking at a screen, trying to look at the right spot. And, but whereas we're just testing this and trying to figure it out, this kind of connection, the distance learning that was Rachel was talking about, it's going to get much easier because they're going to get used to it. And we're just not yet. And so having that embedded without having to go to a purposeful space to do it, it'll be everywhere. And you'll be able to have those connections very, very easily, just like that.
Yeah, it's that, the conversation we were having 5 years ago around digital natives and digital immigrants. It's come to this conversation around virtual natives and virtual immigrants. We're needing to learn how to adapt, create community, learn, work via, this Zoom life. And it's going to come very naturally, in very short order to the next generation.
Not there yet, but yes, I agree with you.
and it's, as a massive sociological experiment, a painful one, but it's massive. There's so much that we're learning about ourselves, our organizations, and our clients. I'd love to ask, before we open it up to the audience for questions, particularly during a period like this, but it could be for always, what keeps the three of you motivated? What keeps you so, what has been wonderful about this conversation is that the three of you are so passionate about your work. You're passionate about the work you're doing for your clients. You're passionate about your firms. What keeps you going? What keeps you motivated? Adelia, can I start with you?
Sure. Oh, interesting. I'm one of those individuals that I've been called a creative to the core, and not necessarily an artful creator, right? But someone that is innately curious and always trying to find an opportunity to really reimagine, what the next day looks like, what the next, year looks like. And what better time to do that than now, right? But
Right.
So you have like a weight on your shoulders. But really what keeps me motivated is, having these discussions with all of you and with our industry partners, and, from the littlest to voices to the, eldest. I mean, we're in a time now where we have 4 different generations working together, in the working environment, and really learning from, all angles, I think keeps me very passionate about what I do. So yeah, and my kids, of course. They're little rock stars, and they're so adaptable. I mean, speaking of it, resilient little members of our community, oftentimes we're clouded as adults with worry, but when we look to them, they're like, oh no, it's fine, we'll do this way, or so really it's many things, but just the surrounding communities and just the way that we operate in our industry.
Perfect. Rachel, what keeps you motivated?
My team, really. Just making sure that I can keep them together and we can keep enough rolling so that everybody gets to still be here after the fact is a huge motivator for me. And I think because that's my big motivator, I had to find some things to de-stress because of all of this, because I was getting so wound up about, got to find more work, got to go do more of this and got to do more of that so that my team can stay together and stay safe and stay healthy. And so I've taken up some sort of weird random hobbies lately. I've started sewing again. So I'm making costumes for my kids and dresses, and it's something my grandmother taught me to do when I was a kid, and so I guess maybe it just makes me feel better. And it's something that you can complete. I think especially for a creative who's in a more of an executive role and you're having to do a lot of business development, there's no real end to business development, right? Like you can't really complete it. You can't really finish it. And I used to get a huge kick out of finishing a project. Well, now that's not really where I can get that buzz. So I've started doing these, these sort of outside craft things that have nothing to do with interior design, nothing to do with my job, so that I can feel like I'm completing something.
And super analog.
Yeah, very tactile, very, very old-fashioned,
Love it. Frances, what keeps you going? What keeps you motivated?
So Rachel, I did the same thing. So I started pouring my own candles, trying to save.
I love it.
Awesome.
So I've started doing that, and then I've been cooking way too much, which is not healthy for us. But I totally agree with that. There is a product at the end that you can hold in your hands, and I feel good about that. But what really has kept me going lately over the last 4 or 5 months is solving puzzles. I'm the kid that would be up at 2 a.m. hiding in the playroom trying to finish the puzzle because I couldn't leave it undone. And right now is such a puzzling time. And we have so many new problems to solve that we didn't have to solve before. And that is so incredibly fun for me because it's very, very challenging. And getting to work with our team and learn, Delia talked about learning earlier. We're learning lots about things that we've never had to learn about before. I could tell you about all kinds of disinfectants that kill things that I never had to learn about before. Being able to take in new knowledge and apply that to problems and to puzzles and help people solve them is incredibly fulfilling for me.
Yeah. One thing that's ringing true with all of you is this sense of finishing something, a sense of completeness. We're living through this time where there are far more questions than answers. And, we're craving something that is absolute and tangible and finished, that, a loop is closed, because, that's just, as human beings, that's just what we crave when there are very few answers out there. I love that you know more about disinfectants than than the average person, Frances. I think that's perfect. I might have a few questions for you.
There you go. I don't want to, but I do.
So we've invited, thank you all for sharing that. That was a super personal question, and I thank you all for sharing those things with us. We've invited our audience to join us back on screen, and we do have some questions. We had one that was submitted before the program from Russ Manthe, and he wants to know, this is a great question. How does the concept of happiness in the workplace translate into the built environment? How does the concept of happiness in the workplace translate in the built environment?
Of course, Russell would ask a super hard question. Thank you.
Happy to oblige.
Well, I'll be happy to kind of go first. And none of this is probably any novel concept, but certainly we talk about, nature deficit disorder and our connection to nature that we no longer have anymore. And we're in high rises and sort of trying to fulfill that void as we design spaces on different levels that we don't necessarily have that immediate connection, whether it's the budget or the program or just the location. So I think the biggest part to connect happiness to built spaces is really, talking about the biophilic design beyond just, textures. And it's really trying to think about how you incorporate and resonate, which is our human quality connection to nature, that we have this innate connection to all things that are, natural or organic, or, whether it's color or graphics or, a flexible space that can then change into something else. And we talk about, especially the ASD community, autistic spectrum disorder, getting satiated on a space or a place or an item, over time. How can we sort of rethink and keep it fun and new and fresh for those who are working in a space or being inside or indoors? Beyond, the visual connection to nature, but trying to really think about how to incorporate that on many different levels of design.
Definitely. And I think, infusing joy into a space without being terribly obvious about it is important as well. That may be little Easter eggs hidden throughout the space. That may be something you're doing with the graphics, but I think a lot of happiness has to do with the people in the space and how they're using it and connecting to each other. So it's our job as designers to create those environments that help people come together and help them to have joy with what they do and enjoy what they do and be happy with what they do and know that we make a difference. Absolutely. In every day when someone is working or being educated in one of those environments that we create, or going into a retail space that we create, we can influence someone's day and make it go good or bad. We really, really can. It's kind of frightening, actually, with what you can do with design. So making sure that the things that we're doing are encouraging that and helping that, and then, hoping and praying that it is infused in the teams that are using those spaces and the customer, the students, and etc.
I heard the other day in a podcast that I was listening to about the workplace, and they were saying that happiness and hygiene are going to be the two most important factors in the workplace once we all get back to work. So being clean and being happy, both are going to matter, and being healthy. Caitlin has a question for the panelists. How do you instigate or force conversation about the importance of community with clients that can't or won't bring it up? And, we've done a great job with the panelists of talking about clients who were open and amenable, already had community in their goals. What about those clients who don't, or maybe don't have, or haven't articulated community as a goal? How do you have that conversation with those clients? That's a great question, and thank you for that, Caitlin.
So I think that a lot of times, especially with some of those old-fashioned clients that are maybe moving, leaps and bounds beyond what they were in originally, you have to kind of tiptoe into it because you don't want to scare them. And so a lot of times we're doing that, talking about the cultures that they want to support And, you know, here are some ways that we could support that. Tell me about what makes you comfortable, what doesn't make you comfortable. But going to see projects, actually taking them into a space where community spaces have been embedded and they're being used and appreciated and loved, and allowing them to see that happen in real time, I think is incredibly important. It's one thing to show somebody a picture of a cafe. It's another take them into a cafe space and see how it's being used and how it's really creating connection among the people that are working for and with that firm. So they're hard conversations to have. It's one of those things that you figure out how to do that over time, and it's not always perfect. But, you know, and sometimes you talk to a client about that and you figure out this doesn't support their work style. This isn't really what they need. Maybe we're creating community in other ways. Maybe instead of, you know, through large gathering spaces or spaces to connect, we're creating community by celebrating things that they're doing within the community, like Habitat for Humanity. Or there are ways to do that to kind of baby step them into it. But every once in a while, we get someone that's been in their space for 30 years. And you have to kind of tiptoe into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know we've been very clever about how we do our programming sessions with some clients in order to, you know, the folks that think they don't need a visioning session, we don't need culture, we just need people to make some widgets. And so you have to explain to the office client that you're not actually making the widgets, and the people who work here sit on a computer and have to do customer service. And if you treat them like somebody who's making a widget, then they're probably not going to be real good at the customer service part of their job. So you can fold it in by asking certain questions during those programming phases, so that you can then explain to them why, well, you know, if the engineers were talking to the marketers, then you wouldn't have the problem you keep telling me that you're having.
Down a path.
And when you can show them, you know, a clear benefit to it, then usually you can get them to buy in to the concept of creating some form of culture within their space.
So I would just quickly say that, how did I say this the other day to some of our designers? Storytelling with empathy and science. You know, because it's really hard to argue the outcome of, you know, for example, case studies that show increase in, you know, whether it's cognitive ability or decrease in stress, or and you're right, as far as, you know, when you're engaging them in our we call them stakeholder engagement or deep dives, we ask some really interesting questions. And some might be, you know, what is a ritual that you celebrate at work, or, you know, in your community? And I'll use one example of a client. It was a goat parade. I guess someone came up with this idea of bringing some animals, you know, into their community and having, you know, this little goat. So it ended up being, it sparked this really interesting ritual. And we talked about, you know, how to create a sense of community through little things like that and making those connections. But we really try to, you know, like you both have said, you know, take them, you know, along, take them by the hand slowly, and really try to talk about these things, you know, genuinely with them, with empathy, but also some rigor to kind of, you know, you want to push a little bit, otherwise we won't change for the good. So yeah.
That's great. Being mindful of those things that make us most human, and ritual and storytelling are definitely two of those. Although now I cannot get the image of a goat parade out of my head. But I want to, we are coming to our close, and I want to thank three amazing panelists. Each of you had such incredible insight into space and place and humanity, and the world as we're living now, and the world as we'll see it in the future. I just, on behalf of IIDA and KI, I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dallas community, for welcoming us and having this conversation. And Deb, let me turn it over to you for any final comments. Whoop, Deb.
I think by now we learned unmute. So
there you
thank
are.
you, Cheryl. And I mirror the thanks to the panelists. Amazing. My thought with the panelists, I've been in this industry a long time, and the future of interior design, listening to this panelist, we're in amazing hands. So again, your passion, your intelligence, thank you so much for sharing that. To our guests, thank you for bringing us into your homes. This is unique. As we talked about, we know the importance of community right now. If anything, we've learned our resilience, and we're living that this evening, and showing the resilience of coming into our homes, and we're adaptable, and the flexibility with that. So with that, we're very honored to be able to share that with you. And thank you for sharing your commute from your kitchen to your dining room table. One of the other things, typically at these events, this is where we might gather and have a glass of wine and some appetizers, and that's shifted our lifestyle as well. And I think sometimes for the good. One of the things that KI will be doing in lieu of food, drink, swag, we're going to take that funding and be a sponsor toward the IIDA Educator Diversity Award. So we are very honored and privileged to have that. So for all of our guests here this evening, know that that's what we did with what would have been your swag and food. We're going to move it towards that sponsorship. And I would be remiss if not giving a huge thank you and recognition to Cheryl. Your continued efforts and leadership to promote equity, social justice in the workplace globally goes without saying. And you are an inspiration, leadership to this industry. Your empowerment is just profound. So I want to thank you. And I think we all on that behalf want to send that thanks. So thank you for everyone.
Thank you, Deb. That was lovely. Thanks so much to you all. Everybody stay safe, stay strong, stay resilient. We'll see you somewhere soon. Take care. Good night, everybody. Thank you, Team IIDA.
Good night. Thank you all.